My name is Robin Prevey. I'm one of the dietitians at Green Mountain at Fox Run, and we're an all-women's health and fitness resort in Ludlow, Vermont. And one of the things that we teach our clients is this strategy of batch cooking and freezing things in more manageable portions. For most people, we're pretty busy, and the last thing that we'd want to do at the end of a busy work day, or any day for that matter, is come home and cook a full dinner. And so one of the things that we can do is batch cook pieces of a meal and freeze them in individual servings. And that prevents us from always resorting to things like takeout or letting Lean Cuisine make dinner for us every night. And having your freezer fully stocked with a lot of different foods from various food groups makes it very easy to put dinner on the table in maybe 5 minutes. So when you're considering batch cooking, one of the things that you want to think about is what food group do you want to start with? And I find it's good to focus on the food groups that take the longest to prepare, or food groups that you just would like to be eating more of. So let's say whole grains, for example. That's a food group that people probably do want to eat more frequently, but they also take a long time to cook. So a person might batch cook a huge container of brown rice and then freeze that in individual portions. Or perhaps vegetables. Most people don't eat them frequently enough, and so preparing things like a large pot of vegetable soup or a vegetable casserole and getting that into manageable portions can make dinner a heck of a lot easier. So there's a few different methods that I use frequently for freezing things in individual servings, and lately my favorite is using a muffin tin. A standard muffin tin is about a half-cup serving, and a lot of foods, a single serving are a half cup. So I find that that works really well for something like a vegetable soup. Particularly if it's pureed, I like to take vegetable soups directly from the blender and then pour that into the half-cup portions of a muffin tin. When freezing in a muffin tin, pretty much you can freeze all these within, I'd say, an hour. It goes directly into the freezer, not covered, and then after it's completely frozen, I'll usually just transfer that to a sheet pan. So open it over. Silicone bakeware would be great for this because that's pretty flexible and easy to pop that out. But if you don't have that, usually you can pop out single servings and knock it onto the sheet pan. So then once you have your single servings frozen, those can go directly into a Ziploc gallon bag. You do want to make sure that you label things well. So I've got my organic pumpkin from my garden last year. If everything is frozen in muffin tins, it all looks the same. So making sure that things are well labeled, and then looking at where you're storing it in the freezer can help you figure out what exactly this is. Some folks are nervous about having plastic contacting their food, so another method where you could still use the gallon bags because they're pretty convenient and flexible would be to take parchment paper and make a pouch, which also helps with labeling. You can write directly on the parchment paper and put the food inside there. All right, another method that I like to use for freezing things is an ice cream scoop method. A standard ice cream scoop is also a half-cup serving, and so if you have foods that are sticky, like hot cereal, in this case we have some cooked oatmeal, if you're using things like sticky rice or, let's see, mashed potatoes actually freeze quite well. And so you would do those half-cup portions, load it up into a pan or a sheet pan, and then put, again, that directly in the freezer, no need to cover it. Once that's frozen, again, transferring it to the Ziploc bag. I also find that there are some foods, such as legumes, that freeze well on a sheet pan in a single layer. So legumes can take a long time to cook. I might batch cook an entire bag of chickpeas or black beans, and then spread that food out just in a single layer. Allow that to freeze, and then once that is frozen, you can just take it out and kind of crack it like an ice cube tray. It all crumbles up loose, and then you have a gallon bag of loose chickpeas, so you can scoop out the amount that you want. The final method that I will sometimes use is if you have one-dish meals, casseroles, even very viscous soups I'll do in a casserole dish. And I'll bake the food and then I'll score it with a spatula. Put that in the freezer, let it freeze for maybe an hour, bring it back out, score it again just to make sure they're really separate pieces. And then once it's frozen solid, that's where this silicone bakeware is fantastic because you can flip the entire thing inside out and then end up with single portions like this. This was a rhubarb crisp that I did and cut it into portions. Right. Once you get your freezer pretty well stocked, the second step might be getting it pretty well organized. Because again, if everything is a very similar shape and you want to make dinner quickly, you do want to be able to find things in your freezer. So another method that I use to keep the freezer pretty organized is using plastic bins in the freezer. If you have a freezer up top, these plastic shoe bins are a pretty good size, and you might then use smaller bags of food. So here's some zucchini from my garden last year. If I had small containers like this, I might just use one bin for all pre-cooked vegetable items. I have a side-by-side at home, so I tend to use very large bins. So I would load this up with all different starches, and that would be one drawer in the freezer. We have another one for fruits and one for vegetables. So when you're trying to put together a balanced meal, which we'll talk about it in another video, making sure that you have starch, protein, and a lot of vegetables and fruits, you can have each of those components in separate containers. So hopefully some of these tips on pre-cooking and freezing will be helpful for you and help you be preparing more meals at home, but doing it a heck of a lot quicker.